I never thought I'd be one of those guys. You know, the ones who spend their nights lying awake, questioning every little thing their wife does. But here I am, Mike, a 40-year-old husband and father, finding myself in exactly that position. Rachel and I have been married for 10 years, and together for 13. We've got 2 great kids, and from the outside, our life looks perfect. But lately, things have felt off. It started with small things. Rachel would go out more often, claiming she needed some time for herself. That didn't bother me at first. Everyone needs their space. But then, there were the nights she came home late, the cryptic texts, and the sudden interest in her appearance. She would dress up more, wear makeup, even when she said she was just running errands. I tried to brush it off. Maybe she's just going through something, I told myself. But the nagging doubt wouldn't go away. One evening, she told me she was going to buy some stuff for the house. This struck me as odd because she hates shopping. When I asked who she was going with, she casually mentioned a friend from work. As she left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I did something I never thought I would. I checked her phone. There it was. A text from a guy named Brandon. "Can't wait to see you tonight," it read. My heart sank. Brandon was my boss. Rachel and I had always been honest with each other, or so I thought. But this felt like a betrayal on a level I couldn't fathom. I didn't know what to do. Confront her? Pretend I hadn't seen it? I decided to wait. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe there was a perfectly innocent explanation. But as the days went by, the signs became harder to ignore. She started to pull away from me, emotionally and physically. Our conversations grew shorter, more stilted. She would avoid eye contact, her answers becoming vague and distant, and the nights she spent out grew more frequent. I tried to talk to her about it, but she brushed me off, saying she was just stressed from work. I wanted to believe her, but the doubt kept gnawing at me. I found myself checking her phone more often, looking for clues, trying to piece together what was happening. Each time there were more messages from Brandon. Sweet, flirtatious, intimate messages that made my stomach turn. I felt like a stranger in my own home. The woman I loved, the mother of my children, was slipping away from me, and I didn't know how to stop it. I started to question everything. Our marriage, my role in her life, her fidelity. One night I decided to follow her. She said she was meeting a friend for dinner, but something in her tone felt off. I waited until she left, then grabbed my coat and followed her. She drove to a small, out-of-the-way restaurant, the kind of place you go to if you don't want to be seen. I parked a few spots away and watched as she got out of the car. Brandon was waiting for her. They embraced, and she kissed him on the cheek. My heart shattered. I stayed in the car, watching as they went inside, my mind racing. I felt like an idiot for not seeing it sooner, for trusting her. The anger and hurt mixed with a deep sense of betrayal. I didn't confront her that night. I drove home, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. How could she do this to me? To us? I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, laughing, kissing, sharing something that should have been ours. In the morning, Rachel came home acting as if everything was normal. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Who is Brandon?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. Her face went pale and she stammered. "He's just a friend from work. Don't lie to me, Rachel," I snapped. "I saw you with him last night." She froze, her eyes wide with shock. "Mike, I can explain," she started, but I couldn't bear to hear it. "Explain what? That you're cheating on me? With my boss?" My voice was shaking now, the anger barely contained. She burst into tears, but I couldn't find any sympathy for her. I turned away, feeling the weight of her betrayal crushing me. "I need some time," I said quietly. "I can't deal with this right now." I left the house, needing to clear my head. I drove aimlessly for hours, trying to make sense of what had happened, of what my life had become. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. The days following that confrontation were a blur of confusion and pain. I avoided Rachel as much as possible, staying late at work or spending time with friends. I didn't know how to face her, didn't know how to address the bombshell that had been dropped into our lives. Our kids could sense the tension, and it broke my heart to see the confusion in their eyes. I couldn't keep going like this. I needed answers, and I needed them now. One evening, I decided to dig deeper. I knew Rachel kept a journal, and though it felt like an invasion of her privacy, I was desperate. While she was out running errands, I went into our bedroom and found it tucked away in her nightstand. My hands trembled as I opened it, feeling like a villain in a story I didn't want to be part of. The entries were heartbreaking. They started off innocently enough, complaints about work, musings about life. But then I hit a section where Brandon's name started to appear. They had met at a company function a year ago, and what started as casual conversations had blossomed into something more. The entries described their secret meetings, the thrill of sneaking around, the guilt she felt but couldn't overcome. My stomach churned as I read about the times she had lied to me, the nights she had spent with him. She wrote about their plans, the dreams they had for a future together, and how she was torn between him and our family. It was clear she loved him, or at least thought she did. But the part that hit me hardest was when she wrote about me. She admitted that she still loved me, that she felt guilty for betraying me. But she was also frustrated. She felt neglected, said I was too focused on work, that I didn't pay enough attention to her. It was like a knife to the heart. I thought I had been doing everything right, providing for my family, being a good husband and father. But somewhere along the way, I had lost sight of what was most important. I closed the journal, my hands shaking with anger and hurt. I didn't know how to process what I had just read. I felt like my world was crumbling around me, the foundation of my life cracking under the weight of Rachel's betrayal. That night, I couldn't look at her. I stayed in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in my mind. How had I missed the signs? How had I let things get this bad? The next morning, I woke up with a sense of resolve. I needed to know the full extent of what was happening. I needed undeniable proof. So I set out to gather evidence. I started with her phone, checking her messages when she wasn't around. The texts between her and Brandon were explicit, filled with declarations of love and plans for the future. I took screenshots, documenting everything. I felt dirty, like a spy in my own home, but I had to protect myself and my kids. Next, I followed her. It wasn't hard to find out where she went. She had a routine, and Brandon was a part of it. I watched as they met at a cafe, their faces lit up with joy at seeing each other. It was sickening. I took photos, capturing every moment. I followed them to a hotel, where they disappeared for hours. It was all the evidence I needed, but it didn't make me feel any better. In fact, it made me feel worse, solidifying the betrayal in a way that couldn't be ignored. One evening, I decided to confront Brandon. I waited until Rachel was out and went to his house. He answered the door with a smile that quickly faded when he saw me. "Mike," he stammered. "What are you doing here? I think you know," I said, my voice steady despite the rage boiling inside me. "We need to talk." He let me in, and we sat in his living room, the tension thick in the air. "How long has this been going on?" I demanded. Brandon looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat. "A few months," he admitted. "But it's not what you think, Mike. Rachel and we just connected. It wasn't planned." "Connected?" I scoffed. "You're sleeping with my wife. That's not connecting. That's betrayal." He looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "I'm sorry, Mike. I never wanted to hurt you. But Rachel, she loves you. She's just confused." "Confused?" I repeated, incredulous. "Confused doesn't make you cheat on your husband. Confused doesn't make you destroy a family." I left his house feeling no better than when I had arrived. Confronting him hadn't given me the closure I needed. It had only made the situation more real, more painful. I returned home to find Rachel waiting for me, a worried look on her face. "Where have you been?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "I went to see Brandon," I replied, watching her reaction closely. Her face paled, and she sat down, burying her face in her hands. "Mike, I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I never wanted this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you." "Then why did you?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why, Rachel? I don't know," she whispered. "I was lonely. I felt like you didn't see me anymore." Her words stung, but they also made me realize something. We had both failed each other. I had been so focused on providing for my family that I had neglected the most important part, my wife. But her betrayal was a choice she made, and it was a choice that had shattered our lives. I need time, I said finally. I don't know if I can forgive you, Rachel. I don't know if we can fix this. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'll do anything, Mike. Anything to make this right. But I didn't know if there was a way to make it right. The trust was broken, and without trust, what was left? I went back to the guest room, leaving Rachel alone with her guilt and her tears. I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew one thing. Our lives would never be the same again. The days dragged on, each one a mix of anger, confusion, and deep sadness. Rachel tried to talk to me, tried to explain herself, but I couldn't bear to hear her excuses. I felt like I was living with a stranger, someone who had shattered my trust and turned my life upside down. I confided in my best friend Tom, who had always been my rock. He listened patiently as I poured out my heart, trying to make sense of the chaos. Mike, you need to confront her properly, Tom said one evening as we sat in his garage, sipping beers. You need to lay it all out and hear her side of the story. Otherwise, this is going to eat you alive. He was right. As much as I dreaded it, I needed to have that conversation. I needed to know if there was any chance of salvaging our marriage, or if it was time to walk away. One night, after putting the kids to bed, I sat Rachel down in the living room. The tension was palpable, the silence heavy with unspoken words. Rachel, we need to talk, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, her eyes red from crying. I know. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. Why, Rachel? Why did you do it? She looked down at her hands, twisting them nervously. I don't know, Mike. I was lonely. You were always busy with work, and I felt like I was invisible. Invisible? I echoed, feeling a surge of anger. You think I was working for myself? I was doing it for us, for our family. I know, she whispered, but it felt like you weren't there for me. Brandon. He made me feel seen, appreciated. Appreciated? I spat, unable to hide my bitterness. And what about our kids? What about me? Did you think about us at all? She started to cry, and for a moment I felt a pang of sympathy, but it was quickly overshadowed by the anger and hurt that had been building inside me. I made a mistake, she sobbed. A terrible mistake. But I love you, Mike. I love our family. I want to make things right. How? I asked, my voice breaking. How do we come back from this? How do I ever trust you again? She looked up at me, her eyes filled with desperation. I'll do anything, Mike. Counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. I don't want to lose you. I sat back, feeling the weight of her words. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that we could fix this. But another part of me was screaming that it was too late, that the damage was done. I need time, I said finally. I can't make any promises, Rachel. I need time to think. She nodded, wiping her tears. I understand. The days that followed were excruciating. Rachel gave me space, trying to respect my need for distance, but every time I saw her, the pain resurfaced. I spent more time with the kids, trying to shield them from the tension that had settled over our home. One evening, I found myself driving aimlessly, trying to clear my head. I ended up at Tom's place again, needing his steady presence to keep me grounded. You look like hell, Tom said as I walked in. I feel like hell, I replied, slumping onto his couch. He handed me a beer and sat down next to me. So, how did it go? I told him about the confrontation, about Rachel's tearful apologies and promises to make things right. He listened quietly, nodding occasionally. So what are you going to do? He asked when I finished. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to try for the kids' sake, but another part of me, I don't know if I can ever trust her again. Tom sighed, taking a long sip of his beer. It's a tough call, man. No one can make that decision for you. But whatever you decide, you need to do what's best for you and the kids. I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. It was a decision that would shape the rest of our lives, and I couldn't afford to get it wrong. The next few weeks were a blur of counseling sessions and awkward conversations. Rachel and I attended therapy together, trying to untangle the mess we had created. The therapist, Dr. Ellis, was a patient man who guided us through the process with gentle persistence. Trust is like a vase, he said during one session. Once it's broken, you can try to glue it back together, but it will never be the same. The cracks will always be there. His words hit me hard. Could I live with those cracks? Could I forgive Rachel and rebuild our marriage, knowing it would never be the same? One night, after a particularly intense therapy session, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Rachel was asleep next to me, her breathing steady and calm. I felt a pang of sadness, remembering the early days of our marriage, the love and laughter we had shared. I couldn't keep living in limbo. I needed to make a decision, for my sake and for the kids. The next morning, I told Rachel I needed to go away for a few days to clear my head. She looked worried, but nodded, understanding my need for space. I drove to a cabin in the mountains, a place I had gone to as a child with my parents. It was quiet, isolated, the perfect place to think. I spent my days hiking and my nights sitting by the fire, reflecting on everything that had happened. The solitude gave me clarity. I realized that while I still loved Rachel, the trust had been shattered beyond repair. I couldn't live with the constant doubt and suspicion. For my own sanity, and for the sake of our kids, I needed to let go. When I returned home, Rachel was waiting for me, her eyes filled with hope. I took her hands in mine, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. "Rachel, I love you," I began, my voice trembling. "But I can't do this anymore. The trust is gone, and I don't think we can get it back." She started to cry, but I pressed on. "We need to separate. At least for a while. Maybe with time we can find a way to co-parent and be friends, but right now, I need space. I need to heal." It was the hardest conversation of my life, but it was also the most necessary. Rachel sobbed, begging me to reconsider, but I stood firm. I had made my decision. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of logistics. We told the kids, who were understandably upset, but we reassured them that we both loved them and would always be there for them. Rachel moved in with her sister, and I stayed in the house with the kids. It wasn't easy. The nights were the hardest, the silence of the house reminding me of everything I had lost. But I knew it was the right decision. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope, a sense of possibility for the future. Rachel and I continued to see Dr. Ellis, but now it was about learning to co-parent and communicate effectively for the sake of the kids. It was awkward at first, but over time, we found a rhythm. The kids adjusted to the new normal, and gradually, the tension began to ease. One day, while dropping the kids off at Rachel's, she pulled me aside. "Mike, I want you to know that I'm truly sorry," she said, her eyes filled with sincerity. "I know I can't undo what I've done, but I hope someday you can forgive me." I nodded, feeling a mix of emotions. "I appreciate that, Rachel. I really do. But right now, I need to focus on moving forward." She smiled sadly. "I understand. Take care, Mike." As I drove away, I felt a sense of closure. The journey wasn't over, but I had taken the first steps toward healing. I didn't know what the future held, but I was ready to face it, one day at a time. As the dust began to settle from our separation, I found myself grappling with a complex web of emotions. The betrayal still stung, and although I was trying to move forward for the sake of our kids and my own sanity, there was a part of me that was consumed by anger. Every time I thought about Rachel and Brandon, I felt a surge of rage that I couldn't shake. One evening, as I sat in my now too quiet house, a thought began to take root. Brandon, my boss, had played a significant role in this mess, and he'd done so without facing any consequences. He'd inserted himself into my marriage, betrayed my trust, and yet he went on with his life as if nothing had happened. The injustice of it gnawed at me. I knew seeking revenge was a dangerous path, one that could backfire in countless ways. But the more I thought about it, the more I felt a need to even the score, to make Brandon understand the pain he'd caused. So I began to devise a plan. I started by gathering evidence. I already had screenshots of their messages and photos of them together. But I needed more. I spent days monitoring Brandon's movements, discreetly following him to and from work, noting his habits and routines. I was meticulous, careful not to arouse suspicion. It wasn't long before I discovered that Brandon had his own secrets. He was involved in some shady business deals, things that, if exposed, could ruin his career. I compiled everything I found, building a comprehensive dossier of his illicit activities. Once I had enough, I prepared an anonymous package. Inside, I placed copies of the evidence I'd collected, along with a detailed letter outlining Brandon's actions. I sent it to the company's HR department, ensuring that the higher-ups would see it. Then I waited. The fallout was swift. Within days, whispers spread through the office about an internal investigation. Brandon was called into a series of meetings, his confident demeanor slowly giving way to worry and frustration. Watching him squirm gave me a perverse sense of satisfaction. He had meddled in my life and shattered my marriage. Now it was his turn to face the consequences. But my plan didn't stop there. I wanted Rachel to understand the gravity of her betrayal as well. I knew that exposing Brandon would inevitably lead back to her, so I decided to speed up the process. I scheduled a meeting with HR under the guise of discussing my own situation. When I walked into the office, the atmosphere was tense. Brandon was already there, looking haggard and anxious. The head of HR, a stern woman named Miss Carter, greeted me with a nod and motioned for me to sit. "Mike, thank you for coming in," she began, her tone professional but cold. "We've received some disturbing information regarding Mr. Brandon and his involvement in inappropriate activities. Given your history and position within the company, we wanted to discuss your knowledge of these events." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "I appreciate the opportunity to speak, Miss Carter. I have indeed become aware of certain actions taken by Brandon, not just within the company, but also on a personal level." Brandon's face paled, and he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Mike, this is unnecessary. We can handle this privately." But Miss Carter raised a hand, silencing him. "Mr. Brandon, we are conducting an official investigation. Mr. Mike, please continue." I laid out the facts, careful to frame my words in a way that highlighted Brandon's deceit without appearing vindictive. I spoke of the personal betrayal, the affair with my wife, and how it had impacted my life and career. By the time I finished, the room was thick with tension. Miss Carter nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you for your honesty, Mike. This information will be taken into consideration as we proceed with our investigation. You may return to your duties for now." As I left the room, I caught a glimpse of Brandon's stricken face. It was a small victory, but it felt significant. He had undermined my trust, and now he was facing the consequences of his actions. Word spread quickly through the office. People whispered behind Brandon's back, his reputation crumbling under the weight of the investigation. It wasn't long before he was placed on administrative leave, pending the outcome. I knew it wouldn't be long before the full extent of his actions came to light. Meanwhile, Rachel had heard about the investigation through the grapevine. One evening, she called me, her voice filled with panic. "Mike, what's going on? Brandon says he's being investigated at work. Did you have something to do with this?" I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. I provided HR with information I had. "Brandon's actions have consequences, Rachel. He hurt us both." She was silent for a moment, then sighed. "I understand, I didn't expect this to happen." "Neither did I admitted. But it did. And now we all have to deal with the fallout." As the days turned into weeks, the investigation continued. Brandon's position at the company became increasingly untenable, and it wasn't long before he was fired. The news spread like wildfire, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a sense of closure. Rachel, on the other hand, was left to pick up the pieces. She had lost her job as well, a consequence of her involvement with Brandon. The reality of her actions hit her hard, and she struggled to find her footing. One evening she called me again, her voice weary. "Mike, I don't know what to do. I've lost everything." I felt a pang of sympathy, but also a sense of vindication. "You made choices, Rachel. Choices that had consequences. Now you need to figure out how to move forward." "I know," she whispered. "I just wish things had turned out differently." "So do I replied. "But we can't change the past. We can only learn from it and try to do better." The conversation ended on a somber note, and I knew that our journey was far from over. But for the first time, I felt like I had taken control of my life again. Brandon had faced his reckoning, and Rachel was beginning to understand the full extent of her actions. As I moved forward, I focused on rebuilding my life, one step at a time. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was determined to navigate it with strength and resilience. And though the scars of betrayal would always be there, I knew I had the power to shape my own future. With Brandon's fall from grace and Rachel's unemployment, the storm that had upended my life began to calm. I had won a small battle, but there was still the war of sorting out the legalities of our separation. The decision to seek revenge had given me a temporary sense of satisfaction, but it hadn't resolved the underlying issues. It was time to move forward with the divorce. I contacted my lawyer, Marcia, a tough and experienced professional who had seen it all. She had been guiding me through the process, ensuring that I was prepared for what lay ahead. We scheduled a meeting to discuss the next steps. When I walked into Marcia's office, she greeted me with a firm handshake. "Mike, it's good to see you. How are you holding up?" I sighed, taking a seat across from her. "It's been a rough ride, but I'm ready to move forward." "Good," she said, opening a file on her desk. "I've drafted the divorce papers based on our previous discussions. Given the circumstances, I believe we can pursue this as an uncontested divorce, provided Rachel agrees to the terms." Marcia laid out the terms of the divorce: joint custody of the kids, no alimony due to her infidelity, and a fair division of our assets. I would keep the house, as it provided stability for the kids, and Rachel would receive a reasonable settlement to help her get back on her feet. "Do you think she'll agree to these terms?" I asked, feeling a knot of anxiety in my stomach. Marcia nodded. "I believe so. Given her current situation, she may not have much choice. But it's always a negotiation. We need to be prepared for some pushback." With the papers ready, I arranged a meeting with Rachel to discuss the terms. We met at a neutral location, a small cafe where we used to go during happier times. The irony wasn't lost on me. Rachel looked tired, the weight of recent events clearly taking its toll. We ordered coffee and sat down, the tension between us palpable. "I've spoken with my lawyer," I began, sliding the papers across the table. "These are the terms of the divorce. I think they're fair, given everything that's happened." She picked up the papers, her hands trembling slightly as she read through them. There was a long silence before she finally looked up, tears glistening in her eyes. "Mike, I don't know what to say," she whispered. "I never wanted it to come to this." "Neither did I replied, my voice steady. "But here we are. We need to do what's best for the kids and for ourselves." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I understand. I feel like I've lost everything." "You haven't lost everything," I said gently. "You still have a chance to rebuild your life, and we both need to focus on what's best for the kids." We went through the terms together, discussing any concerns she had. To my surprise, she agreed to most of them without much resistance. She knew she was in no position to fight, and perhaps she recognized that these terms were indeed fair. "I'll have my lawyer review these," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I think we can make this work." "Thank you," I said, feeling a sense of relief. "For what it's worth, I hope you can find a way to move forward, Rachel. I really do." She nodded, unable to meet my gaze. "I hope so too, Mike. I really do." With the initial agreement in place, the legal process began to move forward. There were still many details to sort out, but the hardest part, the confrontation, was behind us. I focused on maintaining a sense of normalcy for the kids, ensuring they felt secure and loved despite the upheaval. Rachel and I continued to attend therapy sessions with Dr. Ellis, but now our focus was on co-parenting and communication. It was a delicate balance, trying to navigate our new roles while managing the lingering pain and resentment, but we were committed to making it work for the sake of our children. As the weeks turned into months, the legal process continued. We attended mediation sessions to finalize the details of our divorce, and although there were moments of tension, we managed to reach a settlement that both of us could accept. One afternoon, Marcia called me with an update. "Mike, I've got good news. Rachel has agreed to the final terms, and the court has approved the divorce. It's official." The words hit me like a wave, a mix of relief and sadness washing over me. "Thank you, Marcia. I don't know what I would have done without you." "You're welcome," she replied warmly. "Take care of yourself, Mike. This is a new beginning for you." As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of closure. The chapter of my life with Rachel was officially over, and it was time to look forward. The journey had been painful and difficult, but I had come through it stronger and more resilient. I focused on creating a stable and loving environment for the kids. We settled into a new routine, and slowly, the tension that had once filled our home began to dissipate. The kids adapted to the changes, and I made sure to be there for them every step of the way. Rachel and I maintained a civil relationship for the sake of the kids. There were still moments of awkwardness and unresolved emotions, but we were both committed to co-parenting effectively. Over time, we found a way to communicate without the bitterness that had once defined our interactions. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, I reflected on the journey I had been through. The betrayal, the anger, the legal battles, they had all been part of a process that had ultimately led me to a place of peace. I had faced my demons, confronted the pain, and emerged on the other side with a renewed sense of purpose. I knew that the road ahead would still have its challenges, but I was ready to face them. I was ready to embrace the future and build a new life for myself and my children. With the legal battles behind me and a sense of closure in my heart, I felt a sense of optimism that had been missing for far too long. As I watched the sky turn from orange to pink, I realized that this was a new beginning, a chance to start over, to build a life that was true to who I was and what I valued. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of hope. With the legal battle behind me and the divorce finalized, I began to focus on rebuilding my life. The weight of the past year started to lift, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe again. It was a new beginning, and I was determined to make the most of it. The kids were adapting well to the new normal. They spent time with both Rachel and me, and we made sure to coordinate schedules to give them stability. We attended school events and sports games together, showing a united front for their sake. It wasn't always easy, but it was necessary. I threw myself into my work, finding solace in the routine and challenges it provided. My performance improved, and I received recognition for my dedication and hard work. It felt good to have something positive to focus on, something that reminded me of my worth and capabilities. One evening, I decided to go for a walk in the park near my house. The fresh air and the sounds of nature helped clear my mind. As I walked, I thought about the journey I had been on and the person I had become. I had faced betrayal, heartbreak, and legal battles, but I had come through it stronger. As I walked, I noticed a familiar face sitting on a bench. It was Erin, a colleague who had recently transferred to our office. We had worked together on a few projects and had always gotten along well. She looked up and smiled when she saw me. "Hey, Mike," she greeted, her eyes bright. "Fancy seeing you here." "Hey, Erin," I replied, smiling back. "What brings you to the park?" "Just needed some fresh air and a break from work," she said, scooting over to make room on the bench. "Care to join me?" I sat down next to her, feeling a sense of ease in her presence. We talked about work, life, and everything in between. Erin was easy to talk to, and her positive energy was infectious. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park, Erin turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know, Mike, I've always admired your resilience. You've been through a lot, and yet you still managed to stay strong and focused." Her words touched me, and I felt a warmth in my chest. "Thanks, Erin. It hasn't been easy, but I'm trying to move forward." She nodded, her eyes softening. "I can see that, and for what it's worth, I think you're doing a great job." We continued to talk, the conversation flowing effortlessly. As the evening turned into night, we said our goodbyes and promised to catch up again soon. Walking home, I felt a sense of hope and possibility. Maybe this was the start of something new. Over the next few weeks, Erin and I spent more time together. We went for walks, had coffee, and even attended a few social events. Our connection grew stronger, and I found myself looking forward to our time together. She was a breath of fresh air, a reminder that life could still hold joy and new beginnings. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Erin and I went out for dinner. We laughed and talked, sharing stories and dreams. As the night wore on, I realized how much I enjoyed her company, how much she had come to mean to me. "Erin, I've really enjoyed getting to know you," I said, looking into her eyes. "You've brought a lot of light into my life." She smiled, her eyes sparkling. "I feel the same way, Mike. You've been through so much, and yet you still have so much kindness and strength. It's inspiring." Our relationship blossomed naturally, built on mutual respect and understanding. We took things slow, careful not to rush into anything, but the connection between us was undeniable. Erin became a source of support and joy in my life, and I found myself looking forward to the future with her by my side. As the months passed, the wounds of the past began to heal. Rachel and I maintained a civil relationship for the sake of the kids, and over time, the bitterness and anger started to fade. We focused on co-parenting and ensuring that the kids felt loved and supported. One weekend, Aaron and I decided to take a trip to the mountains. It was a chance to get away from the hustle and bustle of daily life and spend some quality time together. The fresh mountain air and the breathtaking scenery provided the perfect backdrop for our growing relationship. As we hiked along a scenic trail, Erin turned to me, her eyes filled with affection. "Mike, I feel so lucky to have you in my life. You've brought so much joy and love, and I can imagine my life without you." I felt a surge of emotion, realizing how much she meant to me. "Erin, you've been a blessing in my life. You've helped me heal and shown me that there's still so much to look forward to. I love you." She smiled, her eyes shining with happiness. "I love you too, Mike." We continued our hike, hand in hand, enjoying the beauty of the moment and the promise of the future. The pain of the past was still there, but it no longer defined me. I had found a new beginning, a chance to build a life filled with love and hope. Back home, life continued to improve. I focused on being the best father I could be, ensuring that the kids felt secure and loved. Erin became an integral part of our lives, and the kids adored her. We created new traditions and memories, building a life that was filled with joy and possibility. As the seasons changed, I reflected on the journey I had been on. The betrayal and heartbreak had been painful, but they had also led me to a place of healing and growth. I had discovered my strength and resilience, and I had found love and happiness once again. One evening, as I sat on the porch with Erin, watching the sunset, I felt a deep sense of peace. The future was bright, filled with promise and hope. I had faced my demons, overcome the challenges, and emerged stronger. And with Erin by my side, I knew that anything was possible. Life had thrown me a curveball, but I had found a way to hit it out of the park. The journey was far from over, but I was ready to embrace whatever came next, confident in the knowledge that I had the strength to face it and the love to sustain me. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the world, I smiled, feeling a sense of gratitude for the new beginning I had been given. The past was behind me, and the future was filled with endless possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly happy.